All right. Welcome everybody to this quarter's Panvala orientation. We host these every once in a while to make sure that all the new communities can get up to speed on what we're doing, how it works, how they can benefit from Panvala as much as they can, and even for existing community members to get up to speed because there's a lot going on. So definitely ask any questions you have during this orientation. There's kind of four parts to it. The first one is just a high-level overview of how Panvala works. Then we're going to dive into like how the governance process works because it's run by the communities that benefit from Panvala, so it's run by you. Then how different ways you can get involved in Panvala beyond just the donation matching. And lastly, kind of some steps you can take after orientation to benefit as much from this upcoming donation matching round that starts tomorrow as you possibly can. So with that said, I'm going to dive into this thing. And again, feel free to interrupt with questions anytime. All right. So first of all, what is Panvala? If you're in the crypto world, you've probably seen a lot of different crypto protocols with their own treasuries. So they're building some sort of decentralized network, and they have their treasury full of tokens to allocate to improve the project that they're working on. Panvala is kind of like that, except instead of focusing on funding one project, we want to be a treasury that communities can share. We want to share it with as many communities as we possibly can for a good reason that I'll get into in a second. If you're not deep into the crypto world, you can think of it in real world terms as a community managed endowment. And the best example I have of a real world endowment is a university endowment, which are very common in the US. I don't know how common they are elsewhere, but there's a lot of universities that are basically funded by an endowment that's managed by their community of alumni and students. They decide what they're going to spend on research, what they're going to spend on education, and what they're going to spend on just student life on campus. That thriving student life on campus that so many people are familiar with is funded by a community managed endowment. And we want as many communities as possible to be able to benefit from that kind of thing without needing an extremely wealthy person 200 years ago to have given them a lot of assets. We want to be able to build it up from scratch, and that's what we're doing here. So why be a part of Panvala? In the near term, a lot of people join because of the donation matching, and we've been doing that for over a year now. This past quarter, we matched the donations for Panvala's communities at an average of 2x, and that multiplier kind of fluctuates over time as the price fluctuates. So last quarter, it was the quarter before that, it was a 7.5x multiplier. The quarter before that, it was 10x. It just kind of depends, but we match the donations that our communities bring in, and that's what brings most communities to Panvala. But what we're trying to do over the long term is to give communities an economic tool that's on par with corporate equity and national currencies. And what I mean by that is if you look out at our society, and if you're anything like me, you see a society that's very dominated by political life and by corporate life, and we see that as mostly an economic problem. Nations have very powerful currencies, companies have very powerful equity, but communities, we just kind of pool our resources together to get things done, and that just doesn't have the same kind of power behind it. So we end up with political life and corporate life being the main event and community life being a sideshow. We think with the right economic tools that community life could be the main event. And we see Panvala as that economic tool that can drive more resources in our society to community life, where people are doing the things they like with the people they like, and a lot of people are generally happier than with political life and corporate life. So that's what we're doing together. And again, I'm going to go into more details about what that looks like. But the way the source of our matching right now is that we subsidize communities the same way that Bitcoin subsidizes its security. So if you're familiar with the way Bitcoin works, and you don't have to be, but if you're familiar with it, you know that there's no foundation behind Bitcoin. There's no wealthy benefactor behind Bitcoin. It's a network that funds itself. It's really a new form of philanthropy. The Bitcoin holders are being diluted every 10 minutes to fund the operations of the network. When you buy Bitcoin and you hold on to it, you know there's going to be 21 million Bitcoin someday, and there's not 21 million yet. So you're basically opting into a system that has promised to dilute your holdings to fund a resource that we all share, the Bitcoin network. So if you hold Bitcoin, thank you. You're a philanthropist. You're helping fund the network we all share. With Panvala, we're trying to generalize that model. We think it's not tied to funding a blockchain. It's not tied to funding technology at all. It's just a new form of philanthropy that we can generalize to anything we want. So Panvala works the same way. There's going to be 100 million Pan tokens someday. There's not 100 million Pan tokens yet. And every quarter, we dilute the people who are holding on to Pan tokens to provide the matching for our communities. That's where it comes from. To kickstart the system, we use the same way that Bitcoin uses to kickstart its system. But again, it's just to kickstart the system. It does not last forever. We can't keep creating new Pan tokens. So we know that the matching multiplier from inflation is generally going to go down over time. Like, it hasn't really stabilized yet, but let's say it was stable. We would expect it to decrease over time, the same way Bitcoin's inflation decreases over time. So we can't just focus on the token as kind of the end all be all of what we're doing together. That's why Panvala is about so much more. That's why we put so much effort into getting our communities to work together, because there is work that we're going to have to do. It's not just about collecting inflation. It's about driving, it's about creating value and redirecting that value back into our communities. So as that inflation subsidy ramps down, we have to ramp up external subsidies like corporate sponsorships, large individual donations, things like that, building up a network of communities that is so attractive to support that we can drive in more external subsidies, not just the inflation from the token supply. So for an example of what that looks like, think about what corporate sponsorships mean in the Panvala context. If you're a business out there and you're trying to decide where to spend your marketing budget, you spend it with the tech giants because all your customers are there. Like, you're going to spend it with Google, you're going to spend it with Facebook because all your customers are there. But we decided to be there. Like, that is value that we're creating, and that value that's going to Facebook and Google is value that we create. And I think we can redirect a lot of that value back into our own communities. And the way we do that is by getting businesses to want to spend their marketing budgets with Panvala because all their customers are there. So we kickstart the system by saying, hey, here are all these communities. We're driving resources into the budgets of these communities. And then we get sponsors to say, hey, all your customers are here. Sponsor this network of communities and drive that value back into the budgets of the communities where your customers already are. That's broadly how we shift our current economy, where all the value is going to the tech giants, to shape that flow of value to go back into our own communities. So that's what our mission is here. We're trying to bring communities together and share Panvala's treasury with more and more communities, because it gets stronger the more we share it. Even the inflation part gets stronger the more we share it, but especially the sponsorship part gets stronger the more we share it, because it becomes a no-brainer for companies to spend their marketing budget by giving it back to their communities. So we want to share Panvala with as many communities as possible and redirect the value we're already creating back into our communities. That's what we're doing here. So our progress so far, we're currently sharing Panvala with 57 communities, and we continue to grow. There's 57 communities today, but we want there to be thousands of communities in Panvala, because that's how it becomes that no-brainer kind of decision. I'm going to take my marketing budget as a business and give it back to the communities where my customers are at, because all my customers are in Panvala. That's kind of what we're trying to do here. Our progress so far in terms of the resources that we were allocating, last quarter, it was 138,000 that was allocated between our 47 communities at the time. And this quarter, the current value of what's coming out of the system, like the amount of PAN is fixed, the current dollar value of it is about 190,000 to be allocated between our communities this quarter. So we've continued to add more communities and share it with more communities. And rather than it being fewer resources to spread around, the amount of resources that we have to share seems to be growing. Again, not guaranteed, but that's what our progress is so far. So that's a high-level overview of how Panvala works, and I want to stop for some questions before I continue on to how we govern Panvala. But anybody have any questions about how Panvala works, why we're trying to bring communities together and what we think we can do when we bring communities together.
I have a question. My name is Stephanie. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. I was listening, but I'm wondering if you could explain, like, to a 5-year-old, how does this work? So you have, like, because I'm still not getting, like, how the financial, like, how the system works. So if I understand certain aspects of the presentation, like you want more communities and you're giving power to the communities, but so how does a community create matching funding for itself? Or how does that mechanism work? But also, like, what is it from the point of view of the community? Like, what should they be doing to be like a good Panvala member and get the most value?
That's a good question.
I'm sorry if I'm asking you to reiterate, but like to a 5-year-old.
No problem at all. This is exactly what the session is for. So I like the question. So really the way that communities create their own value is by working and cooperating with as many other communities as possible. So the more you find other communities you want to work with and you work with them using Panvala, that's what creates the value that we're trying to redirect back into our own communities. That value is not some sort of new value. It's not like you're building a factory or something and that's where the value comes from. The value is the value that's already flowing through our economy, that's from your attention, from people like you and me going and looking at advertisements. That's a value that already exists. It just doesn't go to our communities. If we can get as many communities to work together as possible, we can redirect that flow of value back into our communities. So that's kind of like the hard value that you can already see that's going into our system. The other value is weird crypto value, and I don't try to explain where that comes from. I just say like Bitcoin, because literally we're using the same model that Bitcoin does to kickstart the system. So if you're thinking of where value in Panvala comes from, there's two stories there. One is like Bitcoin, we use that same model to kickstart the system. And then after we've kickstarted the system, the value comes from redirecting the value we already create from our attention and redirecting it back into our own communities. I don't know if that was
Okay.
to a level that a 5-year-old could understand.
So to paraphrase, we're kind of like creating our own, so we're creating like an intentional attention bubble where we're sending our attention around where we want it to go with communities that we're deliberately choosing, rather than just like, so we're kind of disrupting where attention is going by inviting people into our community intentionally.
That's kind of what it is, but think of it less as redirecting our attention to some particular place, and literally just in conventional terms, just sponsorships. Like the same way that a 5K or a fun run is sponsored by different companies that want the attention of the community that's just gathering to have some fun. Like we want our communities to gather to have some fun and then bring together resources from sponsors to go back into those communities' budgets. On a grander scale, I think we can do a lot more than that, but that's the simplest thing that makes sense. We're just trying to bring as many communities together that it makes sense to sponsor those communities because so many of that business's customers are already there.
That makes sense. Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions about how Panvala works? Rick, you were saying something about the supply. I didn't really understand that question, but I want to answer it if possible.
So I mean, just when you were describing that, you were saying that the value comes from the same way that Bitcoin's value comes from, but inflation doesn't actually increase value. Value is a static constant. When you have inflation, it's like you said, diluting the value of everything. So the Bitcoin thing doesn't increase value; it only increases supply. So I mean, I'm still I will admit I'm also in the same boat as Steph. I'm still very confused as to where the value comes from. Like, I understand how tokens just magically occur, but that doesn't really increase value overall. But I'm just going to keep listening and hope things make more sense. Yes.
Cool. Like there's a lot going on, so that's it's fair to be like hesitant there. Like really, there's the reason that there's two stories is because there's one weird crypto story about where the value comes from, which like I believe it, I think it's true, but it's hard to necessarily show other people. But what we're trying to do is beyond the weird token value. It's about the social value. It's about getting communities to work together and redirect the flow of value in our economy back into our communities. So think of it less as like, where does the value of a token come from? Because like I don't care about the value of the token. I care about how many communities we can get to work together, because what we're trying to do is redirect that flow of value back into our communities. Token price be damned. It doesn't, like, that's not the center of the story. Exactly. So a guy said in the chat is that the token part is just to bootstrap the collaboration part, and that's exactly what's going on here. We think tokens are a good way to bootstrap cooperation between people. It bootstrapped cooperation between a lot of Bitcoin miners. We think we can bootstrap cooperation between communities. And at the end of the day, the value doesn't come from the fact that there's some weird magical currency. The value comes from the fact that we're redirecting the flow of value in our economy back into our own communities. All right, I'm going to move on to the next part. The next part has like a lot of details in it. And if there's going to be a lot of questions, but really it's just to get the broader concept of how Panvala is governed into your head. And as we go through each step of actually making Panvala work, you'll have this as a resource to look back on. So I definitely want to answer all the questions you have about it, because there's definitely going to be some questions, but don't worry if it seems really complicated, because you don't need to know this part to benefit from Panvala, but we do want your community to govern Panvala. So this next section is about governing Panvala. There are basically three principles that we use when it comes to governing Panvala. The way that Panvala is governed is pretty different from some of the other crypto systems that are out there. It's not like compound governance. If you're familiar with Moloch DAO, it's not Moloch DAO governance. It's not any of that. We're doing something different, and there are smart contracts on Ethereum that implement this process behind the scenes. But the first principle is that we want community-centered governance. Again, what we're trying to do is bring together as many communities as possible to work together. So the communities have to be the center of our governance, not token votes. So there's individual token holders that have a say in Panvala, but the focus on what we do together is about keeping our communities happy and united, because that's what Panvala is. It's not about token holders driving things. It's about communities driving things. The second principle is that we prioritize social consensus over voting. So since we're trying to keep people together, we're trying to agree on as much as possible. And like if there's some sort of disagreement, we try to resolve those objections. It's like, hey, we want to do this, and you have this objection. Can we resolve that objection so everybody is in support? That's generally what we try to do. But again, that's not always possible. It's hard to get everybody to agree on everything. So we use voting to resolve disputes, but it's a last resort. We don't use voting all the time to make decisions. We try to get everybody to agree. And then if we can't get everybody to agree, then we use voting. Then the third principle is that we allocate benefits from Panvala based on participation and ownership. And for some context there, if you've been a part of different community organizations out there, most of them have no concept of ownership. It's just like, you're here, we're going to work together and do something, but there's no ownership. And if you've been around the crypto world, a lot of crypto protocols are all about ownership, and you just get benefits for owning the thing, and it doesn't matter if you participate or not. Panvala is neither of those things. We combine active participation and ownership because we want to make it easy to share as we grow. If we're growing to include new communities that are actively participating and owning part of Panvala, that makes it easy to share. If we're adding new communities that aren't participating or don't own any of Panvala, that makes it hard to share. So we allocate benefits based on participation and on ownership. Panvala has smart contracts behind the scenes that are the basis of kind of this 13-week cycle, this quarterly cycle that we go through to distribute funds to our communities each quarter. But we try to do as much off-chain as we can. That's kind of like the framework for that off-chain process is what's happening on-chain, the 13-week calendar. But off-chain, we try to use a social, community-centered process to make decisions. So the first step in that process is that the Panvala League makes a budget recommendation. The Panvala League is that organization of 57 communities where there are delegates from each communities and the communities have a say. The Panvala League is the core of our decision making because we want communities to be the center of what happens, not necessarily individuals. So the Panvala League makes a budget recommendation, and that's the first step. They don't have the final say. The second step is that the Token Holders Association takes that recommendation and either submits it on-chain or vetoes that recommendation. And the Token Holders Association is where individual token holders have a say. They don't have a wide range of governance power. We try to limit it. It's really just the purpose of the individual token holders is to uphold Panvala's values. We want to keep that community-centered governance process, but if things go off the rails, that's where the individual token holders come in. And then the last step is that Panvala smart contracts manage a final token voting process for disputes. So even though the Token Holders Association is submitting a recommendation, literally any token holder can do that, and as long as they stake the required tokens. And if there's a dispute, that's what triggers a vote on chain. We haven't had to do that yet, but that's how we resolve disputes between recommendations. So that's this one slide is kind of the takeaway about the governance process. I'm going to go into some more details, but again, we're going to walk you through every step of the way. So you're not going to need to do that much to make this work other than speaking up when you have an opinion.
Can I just have a quick question? Sorry, so can you give some examples of what type of disputes, if there have been any, like what type of, what was this actually governing? Is this governing how the money is split from the inflation, or yes, that's my, I'm kind of trying to figure out what these tokens are used for. Like if I don't use them at all, do they do anything, or yeah?
So most of what we do is deciding how to split the inflation. The second thing that we do is deciding which communities we want to work with. So that all happens within the Panvala League. We're saying, hey, each quarter, how do we want to divide this inflation? And each quarter, which communities do we want to work with? And that's really the decisions that we make. There haven't been that many disputes because of the approach that we take to do it, which is very much just setting the rules. Like if you donate this much and you own this much, then you get this much of the inflation. And I'll go into that in the next slide. But basically, if people were dissatisfied with the rules, if a community or a set of communities was like, we don't think we're getting as much as we should be getting, then that's where the disputes would come from.
So I guess one of the main issues with disputes might be like if there was like a Sybil attack, if somebody created a bunch of fake accounts and was like extracting more wealth than they should, then that might trigger a dispute. But otherwise, everything just kind of is, we trust the powers that be.
Yeah, that's where a dispute could come from. And ideally, we would still resolve that dispute off chain. Like if there's some sort of Sybil attack and we could say, hey, guys, it looks like there's a Sybil attack. This is what we should do to accommodate it. Then we kind of talk things over. And if our communities agree that, hey, this is how we should resolve that, then the dispute has been resolved within the Panvala League without having to go to an on-chain vote. So that's generally the kind of process that we go through. We try to solve things socially before resorting to a vote.
Niran, is that a like a values decision kind of that communities and people can resolve their shit personally before you go to voting? Or I'm just interested in, why that emphasis?
So it's half a values decision. I totally agree with what you just said. Like people are totally capable of solving things by talking better than they're solving things by just casting a vote, I think. But beyond what I think, what we're trying to do together is share with as many communities as possible. And trying to get broad agreement on what we do is the safest way to get a whole bunch of different communities to work together. So if our governance culture is just put out proposals and see if a majority supports it, then eventually you're going to get chunks of communities that just don't like what's going on and that decide not to work with us anymore. But if our governance culture is, let's get as many communities to agree as we can, then the communities that we bring on board will stick with us because we're not doing things that they don't want to do. We're trying to get as many communities to agree as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so going more into like what the Panvala League does, again, this is still off chain, but what the Panvala League does as part of this community-centered governance process. It's delegates from each community working together to make quarterly budget proposals and to admit new communities to Panvala itself. So most of the inflation each quarter is passed on to communities. So the real decisions are about what to do with how we allocate the part of the inflation for shared resources. So like development on Panvala, marketing, things like that. That's about 25% of the inflation each quarter. And we decide what to do with that. And then we decide how much of the inflation we want to just give to the communities. The Panvala League makes those decisions. And I'll give an example on the next slide. If we can't reach consensus, again, that's the goal. We're trying to get as many communities to agree as possible. But if we can't agree, that's when we vote. So voting in the Panvala League is still off chain. It's just a social process, and it's delegates from each community casting a vote. Those votes are weighted by the community's past participation and ownership in Panvala, because that's how we allocate things. So each community has its own voting weight, and the delegate from each community casts that vote. We haven't had to do that yet, but if we had to resolve a dispute, that's how we would do it. And when it comes to accountability, the Panvala League doesn't have the final say. The Panvala League's recommendations can be vetoed by the Token Holders Association. So when, let's say the Panvala League was saying, let's spend some tokens on putting out ads about how our token holders are terrible, they would never do this. But if somebody decided to do that, the Token Holders Association would say, we're going to veto that because we don't like that. So the community-centered governance is the center of what happens, but there's still a veto that the Token Holders Association has. So when it comes to allocating that big chunk of the inflation, that 75%, that's where we set the rules about how we divide it based on participation and ownership. So when it comes to donation matching, we basically set a ground set of rules for what you get when you bring in donations and what you get when your community owns PAN. So a community's matching multiplier increases the more of Panvala your community owns, and the maximum amount you can get from the inflation increases the more you donate. So that's what this matching multiplier progress bar is kind of simplifying. So you don't need to actually know that part. But like once you bring in some donations, and on July 2nd, every new community will have a page like this, but it'll basically say, hey, based on how many donations you brought in and how much of Panvala you own, this is what you're gonna get from the rules that the Panvala League has set up. So that's kind of what we do. That's what makes it easier to reach consensus, because it's just, instead of saying, this community should get this much and this community should get this much. Instead, what we reach consensus on is this should be the rules for how we divide the inflation each quarter. So that's kind of our approach to getting everybody on the same page. It's setting rules and then seeing what the output of those rules are, rather than saying this is how we're going to decide what each community gets. I'm going to stop there for a second for any questions.
I have a quick question. Is it how much you hold, how much pad you hold, or do you also have to be staking pad?
So good question. So in Panvala, staking is literally just holding. You just have to register your account with Panvala, so we know that which community you're supporting with those tokens. So you can think of it, if you're familiar with snapshot voting, that all happens off chain. Staking in Panvala is effectively like snapshot voting. It's just saying whatever balance is in this account should count for this community. So that's how it happens there.
And I have a follow-up question also is like the snapshot thing, like when we have our own Panva, like this page that's on the screen, when everyone has their own, we'll be able to understand what's happening more visually. But do we sorry, my brain is everywhere. The wallet, yeah. Like, is there a certain wallet connected to it?
Basically as many wallets as you want. So there's one wallet that will receive the matching. Each community has whatever wallet's on your grant or your donation page. That's where the matching is going to go. As far as the wallets that can hold PAN and stake it for your community, that's as many as you want. So anybody can show up the same way anybody can show up to donate to your community. Anybody can show up to say, I want to stake for this community.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
No problem. So Steph is asking about all the ways that an individual can help increase their community's matching multiplier. So really the best way to increase your community's matching multiplier is to hold some PAN and to stake it for the community that you care about. Not every community is going to need more PAN staked, because again, it's based on participation and ownership. Even if you have like 1 million PAN, if your community only raises like 2 donations, you're not going to get a ton of the inflation just because you held that much. It's a balance of participation and ownership. So for a concrete example, I'm going to pull up the Blockchain Education Network. So this is a community that joined Panvala last quarter, and this is their page with their actual data about the donations that they raised and their matching. So they're getting almost the maximum matching multiplier that they could get, because they brought in donations and they own PAN. They could get a little bit more PAN to fully max out their matching multiplier, but really the best thing for them would be to bring in more donations. So it's really a balance of those two things. If your matching progress bar is close to filled, you just focus on bringing in more donations. And if your matching multiplier is way down here, you really want to bring in more people to hold PAN and stake it for your community. So it's really this matching progress bar that's going to tell you everything you need to know about how to maximize the benefits for your community. It's just really based on where this progress bar is, tells you everything you need to know.
Do you have just sort of a recommended round number for what, like, you know, if NFDAO is going to hold some PAN, and then individuals could also be encouraged to hold PAN and stake it for NFDAO, but what's a good number that NFDAO should think about just holding as a starting position?
That's a good question, and I usually try to avoid it, but because it's hard to have a good answer to that because it's all relative, right? But my new approach is to just pick a community from last quarter that seemed to be successful and say, hey, they had this many PAN, so that many PAN might work for you. So that's what I'm going to do now. The Blockchain Education Network is my example. They did pretty well, holding 10,698 PAN, and that includes the PAN that they raised. The donations that you receive also count as staking. So if you want 10,000 PAN, you could probably do as well as the Blockchain Education Network did last quarter. Again, it's all relative, so there's no guarantee there. But if you're looking for a benchmark, use the Blockchain Education Network.
How do you withdraw funds at the end of a period?
Good question.
And also, is 1 PAN equal to one USD, or what is like 1 PAN? Like, how much is a PAN?
So the price of PAN fluctuates. One of the reasons I like the Bitcoin comparison is to give people kind of a benchmark for what kind of volatility to expect. The same kind of volatility that Bitcoin has, Panvala has that kind of volatility, probably a little bit more. So it's not pegged to anything. The value fluctuates. It's been as high as 18 cents per PAN. It's been as low as 1 cent per PAN. It just kind of depends what the market values the PAN tokens at. So once you have them, once you get the donations and the matching in your wallet, you can swap them out using Uniswap. So the first step is to say, I'm going to go from Pan to something on Coinbase like Ether or US dollars. And then once you have that, you go to Coinbase and you get money in your bank account. So those are kind of the two steps to be able to pay normal bills using the matching that you get from Pan. You basically swap it out for Ether using Uniswap, and then you swap it on an exchange for US dollars or euros. Any last
Is there
questions?
So is there like a time, is there a time frame, leave your Pan as Pan while you're collecting donations? So is there like a time frame that makes sense for most, or using your example approach, should someone like run should you run a sort of fundraising cycle for a few months and consider like every donation that we bring in, all of the Pan that we accumulate is going to stay until 3 months from now? Is that like a good approach?
So we don't really have a recommendation there because any way works. That what you just described is what most communities do. Most communities don't actually swap out their Pan and use it to pay their bills right now, from what I've seen, but some communities do. So there's basically like 3 approaches to using the Pan that you raise, and the most popular one is what you just described. Just kind of accumulate it until you max out your matching multiplier and then go from there. The second way is to basically take the donations, take the Pan that you get, and swap it out, end up on Coinbase, and have normal money that you can use to pay bills. That's totally acceptable. And then the third way is to use the Pan itself to compensate your community members for the work that they do. And that's actually one of the best ways to use the Pan, because then it stays within your community. You're still increasing your matching multiplier if the recipients of that Pan are staking to support you. So you're both compensating the people for doing work and increasing your matching multiplier when you spend the Pan within your community. So those 3 ways are all acceptable. You can do whichever. The most popular one is to accumulate it over time, but it's totally okay to go and swap it out for normal currency or to use it to compensate people within your community.
Yeah, we have seen some cool different experiments, like communities like DAppNode rewarding the Pan to their community, actually handing it out, distributing it. People using like SourceGrid to distribute it as well as like bonus points or thank you points for engaging or helping each other. So those are kind of cool, unique ways that people have been using it as well. But historically speaking, in case most people in this group don't know, we've followed the Gitcoin grants cycle. So you create a Gitcoin grant and then you accept Pan as your token. That's like the really easy kind of place to do it, because Gitcoin has already built up this network and this framework for getting tokens donations. And then all of the matching would happen after the round. But we just changed it to make staking consistent. So staking is always in effect right now, essentially, which we're still like seeing what the results of that will be moving forward.
So if I stake for these purposes, I guess when I think of stake, the purpose of putting something at stake is so that you have something to lose. So if I stake, I'm not getting slashed or anything, right? There's no misstaking. If I stake on my project, I'm not going to get slashed for some reason. My stake get evaporated, right?
Nope, there's no staking penalties or anything. In that sense, you could say that we're like misusing the term staking, but really what we're trying to convey is that it's an ownership-based system.
So that's really the reason why I've never staked before, is in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to be responsible for missing a thing and therefore waking up one day and my tokens are vanished.
That is very valuable feedback. Thanks for sharing.
The other cool thing about that, Rick, is the tokens never leave your wallet. So you don't even have to like hand them over to stake them. You're basically just saying, I'm Rick, Rick.eth. My tokens live here. And
right.
Then, yeah.
And that's kind of what I was wondering. Because I'm like, because I felt like there may be some off-chain thing where they can be like fiddled with or whatever. Well, and then the next question is, how do I see and make sure that everything I want staked is being staked? Is there like a time at which I have to mention what addresses I want staked, contributing, or yeah, I don't know what better word to use, but whatever word there exists, is there a way to detect how much I'm currently staking and to make sure it's all accounted for?
Yeah, so you're going to have a page on panvala.com about July 2nd, because that's when the next cycle starts. So on that page, you're going to see all the pan that has been staked for your community. And it'll literally be something like this. So it'll give you the total. It won't give you like the list of accounts that are staked, but that's also available. We kind of have this giant spreadsheet of all the Panvala data so people can browse through it and see where everything comes from. So if you care about what's behind the scenes, if you care about literally searching for your actual address in there, there's going to be a spreadsheet that you can search through to find and make sure.
And it can pull in like ZK Sync and other L2 solutions, that sort of thing. Okay.
Yep, we do that already. We pull in from ZK Sync, Polygon, XDAI, and also LP liquidity provider tokens on Uniswap, HoneySwap, and QuickSwap. Awesome. So I am going to, was somebody about to ask a question?
Yeah. And is there any marketplace like where we could buy services from other communities, maybe, or using PAN?
So there's not currently. That sounds pretty cool, though.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Actually, something I've been thinking about, because what we are doing right now is people in the community are just offering services to one another. Like we have someone who does quality assurance, and he's like, yeah, I want to work with the communities of Panvala, and we reward him in PAN. But that could be a cool, like, kind of pay it forward way, like post your services, post your offerings, and then like we all pay each other in PAN for swapping, whether it's like audits or user feedback interviews or, you know, this kind of stuff, crypto stuff. But I love that idea, and I would love to help formulate that as an offering.
Yeah, like the one interesting thing to note on that is that we like that so much that your community doesn't actually have to spend its own PAN on it. We already have a program to reward people for doing things for other communities in Panvala. So if there's somebody who wants to do something for you that's not in your community, the Panvala Fellows program is for them. That's what where the quality assurance work that Yaler was talking about comes from. Literally, we love that so much that Panvala will pay for it from its inflation rather than your community having to pay for it.
Do you want to clarify for Ben the question in the chat, Naran, about capacity and funding at capacity?
So I would call that a mistaken terminology. So it was we did a lot of iteration to convey what's going on here. The best way to understand what's going on is literally the Blockchain Education Network community page, because it's all relative to it. The quick explanation of what those numbers mean is that, like, if Panvala was totally balanced, then each community would bring in a certain percentage of the donations, and they would also have the same percentage of the staked tokens. And that funding at capacity number is what of the inflation each community would get in that balanced scenario. But since that balanced scenario never happens, it's just confusing to people. So we're going to remove that. But that's the quick story behind those numbers.
Okay, I have one more question. So
Ask away.
it might be a simple one, but where we run this, like where would we go? Like we'd go to Give, somewhere like Give ETH, and that's where we'd push the fundraiser or whatever, and Panvala keeps an eye on the Give ETH grant. So you guys are somehow connected to it.
Exactly. We're connected to it through the blockchain. So literally any tool that lets you collect donations on a blockchain, we just pull data from that blockchain about your donations in PAN. So we support Gitcoin. That's what most people use. We support GiveETH or GiveETH. I don't know how to pronounce it. Like any tool you want to use, go ahead and use it, and we'll pull in the data from there.
I definitely think it's Give ETH.
GiveETH it is. Cool. So I think the questions have been the most valuable part of this thing. So I'm going to skip the rest of the governance slides that I had. I'm going to send them to you in email, but I won't go into detail on the governance process because the questions have not been about that. If there are any other questions, feel free to ask them now. If not, I'm going to skip ahead to things that I think you will have more questions about. All right. Let me share my screen again. All right, so the next section is about how you can get involved in Panvala. Really, the best step about getting involved is to making sure you're plugged into where we share information. So the best place to be is our Telegram group for delegates from each community. So if your community has already joined Panvala, but you're not in this Telegram channel, message me and we want to add you to that channel. That's really where everybody's gathered together. The next thing you can plug into is our newsletter. Our weekly newsletter is the Panvala Observer. It's at panvala.substack.com. What we cover there is really what's going on in our communities. We want to highlight what the communities are doing and show communities that aren't in Panvala how they can plug in and what that looks like. So every Monday, a new newsletter comes out there. So if you subscribe, put in your email address, you'll get that every week. The next one is the Token Holders Association. That's that governance group that I talked about, but it's also mostly a social thing. All the information about what's going on in Panvala gets piped into that forum, and it gets posted in groups, so you can kind of opt into the volume of content that you care about. So if you're really interested in helping onboard new communities to Panvala, there's a group for that. If you're really interested in marketing, there's a group for that. So if you join the Token Holders Association, you can get plugged into that forum. Definitely follow us on Twitter. It's Panvala HQ. And then we have a Discord where we have some of our calls and some discussion. The link to the Discord's there. And I'll share, all these slides are going to be shared with you, so you'll have the actual link here to click. The next thing you can do to get involved is to join a group. So we really want Panvala to be run by all the communities that use it. So there are bonuses available for joining these groups. And there are really two kinds of groups in Panvala right now. One is our coalitions. And coalitions are really groups of communities that want to work together. So if your community has other communities, other like-minded communities that you want to help out, that you want to help you, that you want to share updates with, etc., you can join a coalition. There are 5 of those right now, and anytime there's at least 3 communities that want to create a new one, we just create it. The current 5 coalitions are the Future of Work, Women-Led Web3, the Regenerative Commons Coalition, the Digital Identity Coalition, and the Crypto Art Coalition. So those are the 5 that you can join already, and if there's a new one that you want to create, we'll help you create it. When you join a coalition, you earn bonus funding from Panvala, and that goes to fund a multi-sig wallet that the coalition shares. So in Panvala, we're really cooperation maximalists. We're trying to help as many communities work together as possible, and we want to grease the skids of cooperation by literally just putting Pan tokens in a multi-sig wallet that the coalition can share. So when they want to do something together, it's not like, oh, who should contribute, how much? It's like just spend what's in the multi-sig wallet to cooperate, and we want to help make that happen. The second kind of group you can join is a committee. So Panvala's committees are how individuals can get more involved in Panvala's day-to-day activities. So the 2 committees that I already mentioned are the membership committee and the marketing and events committee. There are other committees as well. Basically anything you want to get involved with, there's a committee for that. If you're interested in like contributing code or technical stuff, there's a committee for that. But basically you can get involved that way. And if any community that has at least 1 member on a committee gets a bonus funding from Panvala. This one is bonus funding that goes directly to your community. The coalition bonus goes to the coalition multisig, but the committee bonus goes directly to your community. We want to reward the communities that are actually running Panvala themselves, because that's the end goal that we want. The last way to get involved is events. So there's an event calendar at events.panvala.com, and each community also has a page with their own event calendar. So we try to suck in events from all the different communities that are participating, so you can browse all of them. But also there's a lot of communities that don't have like a good event calendar page of their own, and we want to provide that for as many communities as possible. So if your community wants an event calendar, we want to suck in your events and create a page for you on the site. But some of the events that you can already see there are the monthly Panvala Town Hall, where you can catch up on the latest activity in Panvala and discuss upcoming plans, things like that. We have our monthly coalition calls, so that's where like-minded communities get together, share what they've been up to and how others can help. And then we have a weekly poker game, which happens in our Discord. It's really just hanging out and having fun with people from across Panvala. It's not with real money, so you don't have to worry about losing money. We just play poker and talk and have fun. So those are some example events. There's more on events.panvala.com, and your community's events we want to display there as well. So those are some quick ways to get involved. Any questions on those? All right, so next up is what to do after orientation, because we are almost out of time. So after orientation, what you can do from here. Definitely get involved the ways that I said in the last set of slides. If you don't have a donation page up, you want to create that page. If you do have a page, you want to update it. If you include Panvala League in the title of your page, that helps people find your page. There's several people who like to just go through and donate to all the Panvala grants, and they have to be able to find them in the search. So if you include Panvala League in the title of your grant, that makes you show up in the results. And then you want to make sure that you're actually asking your donors in the description of your grant to use Pan tokens to donate, and that you get extra matching for that. So those are the two things to add to your donation page to get the most benefit from Panvala. You definitely want to ask your community to donate directly, so you can tweet to ask for donations with a link. And if you mention Panvala, we'll be able to find it so we can retweet you and spread it even further. You can directly message people who supported you before, people you think are likely to support you, and ask, hey, can you donate? And then when you donate, can you use Pan so I can get extra matching? And lastly, definitely post your donation link and wherever your community comes together. If there's some sort of forum, some sort of chat group, wherever, just make sure you post it so people know that it's actually happening. So, and then go ahead.
Okay, sorry, one quick question. So you said that the next staking round won't occur until July 2nd.
Exactly.
Whereas it's taking place like tomorrow. So
yes.
Will our stakes as of July 2nd affect this then?
It affects the matching that you get. So you bring in the donations, and then you make sure you own enough of Panvala to get the most matching.
I see. And so I guess we won't have access to that metrics page you had earlier then until July 2nd.
Yeah. So we're going to put it up as quickly as we can. It's just that a lot of it assumes that you've already brought in some donations. So we just need to add some code to handle the case where you haven't brought in any donations yet. But we'll probably have that for you before July 2nd.
Cool, thanks.
And then we'll just manually like tell you like this is how much we see that you've raised if you're interested in that. So the next thing you can do is ask your community to stake Pan tokens. You don't need to do this yet. For new communities, that's going to start on July 2nd. But basically, once you have your results from the donations you've raised, you'll know how much Pan you need to max out your donations. And again, you don't have to max it out. You can be anywhere on this progress bar. But asking your community to stake Pan is how you maximize your matching multiplier. And then you can help grow Panvala by inviting communities you want to work with Panvala. We're trying to help as many communities work together as possible, both because it's fun to work with other communities, but also the more we work together, we can redirect more of the value we already create back into our own communities. If you already have sponsors that support you, then you can bring your sponsors to Panvala, and we can make sure that they can earn Pan when they make donations to you. So they can, we can kind of stretch the dollars that they're using to support you more using the subsidies from Panvala. And lastly, you can bring new sponsors to Panvala. Again, we're trying to build up a network of communities and a network of sponsors, and to close that economic loop. To do that, we subsidize the communities using the donation matching, but we also subsidize our sponsors. So for businesses that sponsor Panvala right now, those sponsorships have zero net cost. Every dollar that they donate, they get to keep $1 of Pan tokens. Again, that's a thing that can't last forever, but that's how we kickstart the system. So if you bring new sponsors to Panvala, we help stretch their marketing budget even further. So that's the Panvala orientation. That's everything you need to know. I'm going to send all these slides to you. And if you have any other questions, we're on Telegram, you can email. We want to make sure that everything's as clear as possible. And if you have feedback on this orientation, things that were confusing, things that could be better, we want to hear that too. We want to make it as easy as possible for new communities to join, because we're trying to be thousands of communities working together to redirect more of the value we create back into our own communities. So thanks, everybody. If you need to go, feel free to go. If you have any questions, feel free to stay and ask them, but we're definitely at time.
So can I just comment, Niran, that we did this very successfully for Meta Gamma Delta. So we did, you know, a Gitcoin matching grants round. So we went in one of their rounds where they're matching, and then did a big push. And then we asked people to donate in Pan. Some did, some didn't. That's fine. You know, we sort of took whatever currencies that they wanted, but we did let them know that there would be additional matching that would benefit us in Pan. And then we received a great additional amount of funds. So it really maximized the funds that we took in. And then I think that we held them really because the value dropped after that. So it wasn't a good time to cash it out, but we also had enough money, you know, through this that we didn't need to cash them out later. I don't actually think that they did. I think that they kept them staked. I'm not positive about that, but it was a really successful thing. And we saw the value of asking people to do it and educating them how to do it. I sort of agree that like a regular community group who has nothing to do with crypto might find this challenging, but you know, there's an education opportunity, and a lot of this comes from being willing to walk you through it and show you what the value and the benefit is. But for a group that's, you know, I would say, you know, we have some newbies who had to walk through buying Pan. I'm not a newbie to crypto, but I definitely had never bought Pan. So I did it, and it benefited us a lot. So then I really was on board with it. So I just wanted to share that experience, that we found it very valuable.
Thanks for sharing, Ann. I really appreciate that. It's definitely hard to get people to especially people not in crypto, like guys saying in the chat, to swap for Pan and donate with Pan. Like, it's a big friction point, right? That is the current way we allocate our matching, but it's not the only way to allocate matching. And really, as we ramp up sponsorships, it's less about caring about how much an individual community is raising in funds, and more about what sponsors want to support. So rather than having all these people have to get on board and swap for Pan and make donations, like that's what we do today, and it works pretty well. But we also want other methods for communities to be able to earn from Panvala's inflation. So as we grow, as we bring on more sponsors, as we bring on more communities, expect to see other ways to be able to earn from Panvala's inflation besides convincing all your community members to swap for Pan and make donations. It's hard, but the communities that succeed in doing it right now are going to get the most of the inflation. And then we want to come up with other ways for other communities to succeed as well.
Bye, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for all the great questions, and looking forward to working with y'all to redirect a lot of the value we create back into our own communities.